This is the IDP After Show.
Welcome to another edition of the IDP After Show. I'm Jase Abbey, and as usual, at this time each week, I'm going to be talking about some of the key players in my weekly rankings. My guest this week is none other than Mr. Nate Marcum, Fantasy Pros top 5 IDP ranker, host of the Shoot the Gap show, and content creator for Fantasy in Frames. Nate, as I was saying to you earlier, you've been on my list for a while as someone I was really keen to have on the show. Thanks for taking the time. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. No, this is an honor to be on the show with you. I respect all the work that you do, and I would say that if there was a show for me to, hanker to be on, this is definitely one that would have been at the top of my list as well. So it's a match made in heaven.
Too kind. Awesome. Tonight we're going to be trialing a new format on the show. We've been talking about it off air. We'll still do a highlight and a slightly deeper dive about a guy we like and don't like at each position for week 6. But we're also going to be introducing a new segment where we offer more of a quick fire list of around 5 or so guys at each position who have favorable matchups and 5 who don't. So look, Nate, let's kick things off with the position that gets everyone excited about in IDP, linebackers. Which linebacker do you like the look of in week 6?
Yeah, so he's one that I've liked to look, honestly, the entire year. And it's been kind of an up and down season so far as playing time, consistent playing time, that is. And that's Damone Clark with the Dallas Cowboys. And a lot of this is predicated, unfortunately, on the injury to Leighton Vander Esch. But Damone Clark, even on scattered games, where the snaps haven't exactly been there or he's seen an influx, he's seen a 16% tackle rate. So he's been game in and game out. Sometimes it's highly rated. PFF or whoever you listen to, Twitter fans, and just football talk in general, he's sometimes their best run defender in the linebacking group. And this week, I think that that's an ideal scenario for him to be utilized. I think that we'll see 100% share. One of the things talked about today, of course, was Rashaan Evans going to Dallas. Threw a little water on my Damone Clark parade, but that's probably not for this week. It's most likely for next week and going forward. As far as ECR ranks, he's the LB 54 on the week, according to Fantasy Pros. I have him as my LB 24. He's right on the edge of my LB 2. I think the Chargers, if you look at it as a whole, offensively speaking, they're averaging 70 snaps allowed to the defense, or however you want to phrase that. That seems like they're just, we're allowing all these. They're so good. They keep the defense on the field for, 70 plays per game, which if you look at a 16% tackle rate over 70 plays, if that's how you want to extrapolate that, I look at it as more like realistically, they're going to try to get the ball out of their hands as quick as they can if they have Micah Parsons, et cetera. And I think that it will funnel a little bit more to the linebacker. And if that's the case, and they get Austin Eckler back. So, that, as you know, it should mean a heavier volume as far as the running game. If that's the case, that what I've seen about Damone Clark and his involvement with the running game, personally, as much tape as I quote unquote watch, it's hard sometimes to decipher a lot of the internals as far as how good was he on, picking up on the run play. But from what I have seen, I think he will be instrumental. Double-digit tackles wouldn't shock me at all. How high do you have Damone Clark this year or this week?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, I've got him down at LB 45 for the moment. It's kind of tight above him. There's a lot of players above him, but most of those guys, I'm pretty reasonably confident that they're going to be full-time guys. Now, I may move him up, not because you have him higher, well, partly, but also because the more I've looked into him as a player, the more I've come to like. As you said, he's got 15.9% tackle efficiency rate, which ranks 16th out of 83 qualifying linebackers who've played at least 75 snaps this year. In coverage, I wasn't that impressed when I saw him, but was surprised to find that he's only allowing a 79.2 QB rating when targeted in 2023. But the thing I like the most of all the things I was looking at is that he he rarely, if ever, misses a tackle. I think he's produced. I've got this written here somewhere. Let me try and dig this out. But something like he's only missed 2 tackles in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. His ability as a tackler is just incredible. So we're not going to lose opportunities in the same way as we do, currently with those Broncos linebackers, for example.
Yeah.
He's going to take advantage of everything that comes his way. So yeah, I like him. I actually listed him as my LB riser this week, but I put a second one in just in case, because I thought, Clark's going to be a popular guy this week on the back of that, as you said, that unfortunate injury to LVE. So, I'll pivot to my guy. So I've gone with my second guy. I'm not as high on him as I am Clark, but it's EJ Speed. This is a guy that's risen in my rankings every single week. Shaq Leonard's role has been diminishing by the week. Sort of snap share has grown from 41 to 55% in the space of 4 weeks. That wasn't like a meteoric rise, I know. But after 5 games, Speed was outproducing. Sorry, after 4 games, Speed was outproducing Leonard, who at that point had played 50 snaps more than Speed. Last week, in Leonard's absence, obviously Speed played every down. We expected him to. Nice to see it happen. And while Leonard did practice in full today, I think his injuries kind of hastened what might have otherwise happened anyway. We kind of saw Speed start to overtake Leonard. At the crux of it all, I think, Leonard's just not looking like the guy that we knew him to be, right? He looks cumbersome. He looks slow. He just doesn't look anything like the guy that I kind of fell in love with a couple of years back. And it's sad to see. It's sad to admit, but I think it's Speed's time.
I'm right there with you, and it hurt. I hated watching that in that first real week where we had the hinting that Leonard was going to play a full-time role. He was healthy enough to play every snap, and we saw that where he didn't. It's not like he forced his hand to be out of the game. It's not like he missed a ton of tackles and just was playing poorly. He was just never able to get into the positions that he was able to get in prior, especially under like Eberflus. And so we saw that EJ Speed came in and really has just defined, like last year, even coming into this year. He did one thing you talked about with Damone Clark. He didn't miss tackles, especially on run plays. And that was the one thing that he did. He's had a couple missed tackles this year. And those come and go. And I know looking at PFF's missed tackle numbers is pretty solid for the most part. But at the end of the day, I try not to use that as the gospel in terms of how, unless I'm like you and you watch the players. If you see it and you understand, he's constantly missing tackles or over pursuits, then it's one thing. But I'm right there with you. Where do you have EJ Speed at, if you don't mind me asking?
I've got him as let me quickly check. So he's down at 47 for the time being, but so one of the things, and the reason being, one of the things I'm concerned with Speed, I've listed him as one of the guys that I really want to talk about this week, and who's rising a little bit. But one of the things I'm concerned about with him is that Leonard's going to come back. Leonard's not going to play as many snaps as Speed, but he'll play enough to take away some of what Speed could do if Leonard was not in the picture. So that concerns me a little bit. But he'll probably see a rise. I changed I tweaked my rankings, I should say, on Thursdays and again on Sundays, bearing in mind the latest injury news and so on and so forth. So there's a couple of guys above him who I know I've got to drop altogether. But he's down there at LB 47. Feels a bit harsh now. I kind of look at it again, but
I change these rankings I talk to people like yourself or someone else and they mention something. I'm like, and I tweak it. And I look at some of the people's names ahead and I see someone that I go, now why in the world would I have him below Denzel Perryman or somebody like that? Somebody that maybe I'm not as high on this week or whatever the case may be. And so I'm tweaking constantly, which only does one thing, is makes me really furious when I realize that I shouldn't have moved a la last week Jerome Baker so far down because there was a non-zero chance that he wasn't going to dismiss playing time to David Long, that he might actually see enough. And so I'm right there with you on EJSP. That's fun. That's good that we both are in agreement so far to start off. There's no fisticuffs to begin.
I'm sure we'll get into it at some point. We got an ocean between us as well, so we can just go at it without like fear of someone turning up on somebody else's doorstep and making it real.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's good to know. You were not willing to cross the river to beat me up over my love of Damone Clark.
I mean, we get passionate about this stuff, right? But I can't think it'd ever devolve into that. But hey, so let's kind of talk about this new segment I talked about earlier on. So linebackers with favorable matchups this week. I've got a list of 5. Do you have something similar?
I do. I have a few players. I was also just gonna, I was gonna kind of bounce off a little bit of what your 5 were and have a little, to and fro, see how an agreement or disagreement I may be with some of them.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, so there's a couple of things I've looked to when I'm thinking about guys with favorable matchups. So, one is form, and I appreciate that goes beyond just being a matchup, but I like players who are playing well currently. Pretty obvious, right? Guys who are obviously playing almost every down is something that I look to all the time. But beyond that, really guys who are playing against teams that are allowing a lot of tackles to linebackers. That for me is probably the biggest differentiator between the guys who have made it onto my list and those who haven't. And so for that reason, I've gone with Zaire Franklin. He's a guy who we know can put up tackles against anybody. Any weekend. I think he might lead the league in tackles currently, or at least solos anyway. Him against the Jags, Kyzir White against the Rams, Pete Werner, who I know is not quite blossomed yet and hasn't really, emerged as that guy that we really wanted. I know that his snap share is down. Bobby O, who faces the Bills. And then Jack Gibbens, who goes up against the Ravens. All of those 5 teams that these guys are playing against have conceded or allowed much higher than the average tackles to linebackers. So yeah, that's the reason why I've gone with those 5. What's your thoughts on any of those?
Yeah, I mean, the immediate reaction is that every single person you just listed, I have higher than at least ECR consensus, but not by much on some, because I think that it's smart to be high on Kyzir White. I mean, I don't know how much higher I can get. He's already an LB1 for me, just the pure volume that the Rams should offer.
Same.
It's hard to say that we've seen 1 week with Cooper Kupp and what that can mean, but I don't think it doesn't mean what we've seen out of the Rams so far is that there should be plenty of funneling to the middle of the field, or at least middle out, and allowing someone like Kyzir White. And let's be honest, the Arizona Cardinals have the worst pressure rate in the NFL, and their pressure to sack ratio has been so wonky all season that it was bound to happen. That I think they're gonna have time, the Rams will, to establish both a running game as well as a passing game to allow those tackles to kind of funnel to Kyzir White. It just seems like when there's nobody on the defensive line to occupy, you have to assume they're going to have X amount of tackles. And if I can eliminate that defensive line from eating 5 to 10% of those, somebody else is going to have to. And Jalen Thompson is now banged up. He didn't practice today. And if Jalen Thompson's out, one more, mouth to not eat up some of those tackles. So I think Kyzir White is an excellent play for someone that should be higher than maybe some others think, at least for one to start off. I could probably talk about each one. I'm always
Nice.
high on Bobby O and Buffalo. I mean, there's not much more you need to say as far as an offense that should keep them on the field, and a defense. Or my God, are the Giants the worst offense in football possibly right now? I mean, it's mean to say, but is it?
Got to be up there. I think the Steelers were in contention for a while there, but yeah,
Pickens
Pickens kind of went off the other day, and Yeah, it's got to be the Giants. That offensive line is just one of the worst. Even the Commanders, right? So Sam Howell he'd been sacked more times than any other QB in the league, but even he looks okay on occasion. But yeah, the Giants, they've got to be. They look pretty terrible, and they desperately need Barkley back. And even then, I'm not sure how much is going to change.
I know. I think that it's their defense should be on the field so much that Bobby O should absolutely just eat. There's a couple other players on that defense too that I like, maybe at different positions, but Bobby O for that same reason. Like I have him. He's borderline just right at the beginning of that LB2 conversation for me, and I could make a case above some of the other guys that I have ahead, pretty easily.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've got him. He's squarely in my LB2 territory, but yeah, like you say, it's pretty easy, especially this week, to make a case that he could be and should be higher. I did think about mentioning Simmons here, but I feel less confident that he. I need to see that McFadden isn't coming back this week before. Yeah. Before I can recommend starting Simmons. But yeah, he was one I thought about. Not keen on the player, but the opportunity is there.
I did include Simmons. Simmons is one that I put as with an asterisk because McFadden did miss practice today. Now Wednesday practice is not the end all be all, but him missing practice does give me a reason to move McFadden up. I mean, Isaiah Simmons up. I've been an Isaiah Simmons fan since he was drafted. Unfortunately, it was now we know, to the wrong team, or the team that lied about his usage. And then the Giants, I thought, would be it's the easiest way to be duped into thinking, here comes a situation perfect. You have a Wink Martindale defense that is designed to blitz and utilize these star players or star position or just multifaceted type of linebacker safety hybrids. And despite the number of injuries across, I mean, we saw missed snaps all across the defense for the Giants, and Isaiah Simmons still couldn't occupy a heavy enough workload. And so now I don't think we saw last week, which is just enough for them to pull the rug out from underneath us, that we think he's going to get a full workload. But I think that you're right.
So linebackers that we're not so keen on this week, who are you fading at the position?
Yeah, I'm 50-50. And I'm 50-50 on, like, I want to, and this is an outweigh as far as fading, because I want to believe that JOK with Cleveland is an excellent pick. I think that against San Francisco, that opportunity with the amount of defensive snaps he should see, a run-centric offense, but that snap share in Cleveland just has me terrified. And so I just want to avoid, it's like, I want to build him up. I almost put it. That's the most polarizing player. And that's the only reason I'm mentioning him, because he's the only player that I have on the list that I actually put on the 5 guys I'm higher on and 5 guys I'm lower on. And that's not good. That usually means avoid. The other one is Denzel Perryman, because I don't trust his usage exclusively yet this week. I like him coming back and taking over full-time share at some point. I just don't know when that's going to be. And I think that's probably the overarching theme for a lot of these linebackers is unguaranteed snaps.
Yeah, and there's a lesson to be learned there, isn't it? I think I made a similar mistake with Kendricks last week. Saw he was back, saw he was going to be playing. I just assumed that he'd be, the 100% guy, and it didn't happen. Now I know that he's a much better linebacker than Kenneth Murray still, even at his age. But yeah, these teams sometimes are not in any hurry to rush these players back, and yeah, I think that might also apply to Perriman as well. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, JOK, I'm right there with you. That division of snaps in Cleveland is just super frustrating. It's really hard to know which guy to trust, and then you just end up not trusting any of them if you can avoid it, right? So I talked about him on an earlier pod, actually, JOK, and he's the sort of guy that, if we're talking about dynasty rosters or dynasty leagues, then I'd keep a spot open for a player like him if it was deep rosters.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's hard to get too invested in that situation. So I'm just one of those people that just says, like, you know what, I'll avoid it and find other guys with, even if it's like the Jack Gibbens type. I know he's never going to be the number one unless something happens to the guy ahead of him, but I know he's going to be 75, 80% every week, whereas JOK could be 80% one week and then could be 60 the next week. And that's just infuriating sometimes. My guy, and this might be a slightly obvious one actually, is Chad Muma. But I kind of just really wanted to talk about him because he's a guy who had the opportunity to prove what he could do in that 2-game absence. Devin Lloyd missed the London game, but Muma was so poor. It was surprising. I wasn't his biggest fan after last season, but I thought in these games he just really didn't impress me, and his production as well was equally as disappointing. So Devin Lloyd has not been stellar himself, let's be honest. But I think on the basis of how Muma has looked or not looked, Lloyd is probably going to step back into at least the more significant role going forward behind Owusu-Koramoah. So, it's possible that Muma doesn't disappear completely, but I very much doubt that his role will be large enough to warrant fantasy consideration for the foreseeable.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I had higher hopes going into the draft last year for Muma. Thought the landing spot was never ideal anyway, especially after, first it's Owusu-Koramoah being there, and then you already draft Devin Lloyd, so you think, well, Muba's going to find a landing spot. There was too much upside. And then to go there, you just knew that at best it would be a rotation of sorts, which is not good for anybody. The team, either of the players, because it's hard to think that because they both did very similar things well. And it's not like one is outstanding at run and the other one's outstanding in coverage so much so that you can alternate them. And yeah, I don't know, man. That's a really tough one. It was a disappointment last year because I had Muma pretty high. I thought against this Buffalo offense, I don't think the game went as I had anticipated necessarily. But then to see 3 tackles, I guess is I think all he had. It's it was rather disappointing.
So linebackers with unfavorable matchups this week. So and these are some pretty good players in this list. So I've gone with Frankie Luvu, Henry 2020, Jordan Brooks, Tremaine Edmunds, and Javon Bentley. Now, for the most part, these guys are the exact opposite to the 5 I mentioned that do have favorable matchups. So these guys are playing against teams who typically don't allow a lot of tackles to the linebacker positions on opposition teams. But there's a few wrinkles in there. So Brooks, I mean, I'm hoping after a week's rest, he's going to come back and become that every down guy that we've known him to be in the past. He's, as I say, he's had 2 weeks since his last game, so you'd have to think that he's right back there, and I can imagine that's the case, but I don't know it for sure yet. So that's another wrinkle with him. 2020, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to be an every down guy going forward because, what else have they really got? Harris is pretty rubbish in my opinion, and I forget the other guy.
Blake Cashman.
Oh yeah, Blake Cashman. I mean, I can't imagine that he's gonna see the kind of usage that he saw last week on an ongoing basis. So yeah, I think it's 2020's job to lose. But like I say, this is more about guys who are playing against teams who don't typically give up a lot of tackles to linebackers. Small sample size though so far. Still 5 games. Things can change. Game scripts can be completely different. Well, I'm not saying these guys are going to be terrible this week. I'm just saying their chances of having a solid performance, in my opinion, are slightly reduced given who they're playing against.
You're exactly right. And if you look back at teams, for instance, going against Cincinnati, and yet I, of course, on my players that I was higher on against the Chargers, and the Chargers don't allow a lot of points to the linebacker. But the Chargers also haven't necessarily had Eckler, and I think that can define quite a bit without having Mike Williams, maybe more funnel to the middle. And the usage of the tight end, I think that is it's gonna be reduced a little bit. I don't think as much Donald Parham involvement, but Cincinnati, on the other hand, I mean, week 1 against Cleveland, nothing. Week 2 against Baltimore, Roquan and Patrick Queen both, under double digits, no tackle upside there. Ernest Jones in week 3 wasn't really even amazing. It's just been a lot of the guys that should have eaten a ton of the tackle volume in Ernest Jones, Azeez Al-Shaair, and Kyzir White in 3, 4, and 5. And they've done a good job of dispersing the ball away from the linebacker position. And that does. I think Bobby Wagner's still going to be Bobby Wagner, just because, Mixon's going to get enough. They're going to have enough plays where he's involved. But I think that, I moved Brooks down a little bit. I still like Brooks, but I don't have him as my, as an LB, a solid LB 1 or 2. I'm a little cautious. So that's a really good call right there. Luvu the same way. And then, what's crazy, like Luvu's value for me also was tied to his ability to rush the passer. And Miami allows nothing as far as pass rush. Their offensive line, even without Teron Armstead, has been, exceptional. Like to the point where I really thought, I think the game against Jacksonville, they were supposed to get beaten up. No, it was the Chargers. I'm sorry, because it was Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa are going to destroy Miami. And that was without Teron Armstead that first game, and they held up really, really well against them. And then in a few other matchups, Miami's done just so much better. Where they have the Dolphins' offensive line has allowed double-digit pressures only twice total. So here's a team that's allowing nothing, and that's an added bump for Luvu that's really valuable, at least from what I've seen so far on this season, is his ability to get throw in a couple of those sacks or tackles for loss, especially.
What have you got for us on the defensive line, Nate? Kick us off with a guy who you're keen on in week 6.
Yeah, and this is one that, man, I tell you what, it is a long time coming or not, because I keep I've had my fingers crossed for him for a while, but injuries and production, and now he's on a new team. Marcus Davenport, very polarizing. I get it. ECR, he's the defensive line 65. I have him as a defensive lineman like 3/4, right around that 36 to 38 range. Last week, nearly 80% of the snaps. Love the matchup on that outside against left tackle Larry Borum, who just got annihilated last week. If you saw that, he allowed 8 pressures. Love the matchup. Love the fact that Davenport's healthy. Anytime you can go opposite Danielle Hunter, that just seems to be advantageous. We know the Bears have been the Bears. The Bears have allowed the most pass, pressures per drop back for the last 2 years. The matchup is terrible. And then you take out Khalil Herbert, who has been their best pass blocking running back, and you replace him with maybe Roshan and a concussion protocol. And if it's not him, Deontay Foreman, neither one of which are as good as Herbert. It's small sample as well, too, because they haven't had a ton of experience over the years. Roshan, none. And then Foreman has a little bit more, of course, than Khalil Herbert. But it's a dangerous game to play Marcus Davenport because he can disappoint. But the last 2 weeks have been solid. He's had 7 pressures over the last 2 weeks. I like what I've seen. He seems to be getting the playing time. And we know that Minnesota can score, hopefully without Justin Jefferson. And hopefully that puts Chicago on their heels a little bit and makes them pass. And if that's the case, I could see him getting to Fields. I'm hoping for just once from a defensive line position. So all you really need to support a defensive line 3.
Yeah. I thought we were going to be far apart on him when you mentioned him, actually. But I've got him ranked fairly similarly to you this week. I've got him ranked as my DL 38 or Edge 28. So I think we're kind of in sync on that one. We've been here quite a few times before with Davenport. Is one of the things that I always think about with this guy. He's teased us a few times with his talent. We know he can do it. The question really comes back to can he stay healthy long enough to what we know he can do. And yeah, that remains to be seen. But like you say, he's looked good in the last 2 weeks, and the snap share is really healthy. So he's playing on a team that seems to believe in him as well. Opposite of a really good edge rusher. So yeah, there's more to like than to dislike there. My first guy is Trey Hendrickson. So he's my DL and Edge 8 for the week, one behind Montez Sweat and one ahead of Brian Burns. He's just been on a tear. That's no secret. Seven sacks in 5 games, 27.5% win rate, which is fantastic. As I said on another pod just recently, he's not faced the most difficult opposition so far. This is not like a Chase Young situation where he's gone up against some really good tackles to open the season. Hendrickson has had some, pretty easy games, comparatively speaking, but it doesn't make me feel that different about what he's done. This is the highest level of the game. No one's absolutely dreadful. He's still got to get it done. So, and this week, what I really like about him, and the main reason I wanted to talk about him beyond the fact he's just playing really well, is that he faces another suspect offensive line when he goes up against the Seahawks. I know Geno Smith hasn't taken a huge amount of sacks this year, but you can't bet against Hendrickson when he's playing in the form that he is. So yeah, that's my call.
Nope, right there with you. I actually have him a spot, one spot ahead of you. He is my I have all my defense for Fantasy Pro scoring, at least for my rankings there. Yeah. They're together, but he's my defensive lineman 7 overall. Just and for that exact same reason. And to be fair, going into last week, if we had this same conversation in week, say 2 or 3, he probably would have been on my avoid because he has been sack or bust, no tackle upside. He still doesn't have a ton of tackle upside. We both know that. That's Sam Hubbard's side.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's who he is. When you're going against Stone Forsythe, which at left tackle that's who the primary majority should be. And he's been a turnstile. And so I think we'll see the same thing. I mean, you have to go. I've been, knock on wood, I think I've been pretty successful with my defensive line rankings as a result of trying to understand offensive line tendencies. And they run so many that speed rush against Stone Forsythe. His name is fitting because he is like stone. His feet are like stone. He's got no lateral movement. He's hard time stopping that speed rush to the outside. And I think that's what Trey can do against him.
So the guy I'm not as interested in this week as I might be otherwise in other weeks is Quinnen Williams. Yes. He's my DT10, DL31. He's one behind Leonard Floyd and one ahead of Jermaine Johnson. So I mean, look, he's an incredible player. We all know that. He was many people's DT1 coming into the season, and for good reason. He was fantastic last year. He hasn't had the sack production this year, but he has been close. He's been getting a shed load of pressures, a shed load of QB hits, 4th amongst all DTs in total pressure so far. So I think the sacks will come. What I don't like this week, and this is the only thing I don't like about Quinnen Williams, is the matchup again. He's going up against the Eagles. Well, I mentioned earlier on what they had done to Aaron Donald last week. I know they're missing a player, Cam Jurgens, at the moment, and they've replaced him with another guy whose name I forget. But it doesn't seem to have made a huge amount of difference. They've still got 4 other really good players, and I'm concerned that what happened to Donald will happen to Williams as well.
I'm right there with you. In fact, actually, I was bouncing back and forth between Quinnen Williams and mentioning either Myles Garrett or Micah Parsons, but it was maybe a little more emphatic and exciting to mention some of the big names just because I was scared to do so last week. But you're right. The Quinnen Williams matchup, I'm avoiding pretty much. There's about 3 or 4 offensive lines, or at least maybe 2 or 3 offensive lines as a whole, 1 or 2 offensive linemen as a whole, that's just It's just an avoid. And that is the Eagles specifically. I mean, when you look at last week, even against, I mean, just as a whole, they don't have like one offensive lineman, even with, like you said, when they're doing that, what is it, Suopeda has played the last 3 games, kind of like it as a fill-in role. And he, even being the lowest graded offensive lineman as out of the group, was still a 71 in pass blocking. I mean, the 3 pressures allowed, 3 hurries. It doesn't bother me. I am avoiding him. I'm avoiding, like I said, San Francisco kind of as a whole. The Chiefs offensive line can be really good at times, but it just seems to be smart to avoid those situations. So yeah, Quinnen Williams, it hurts because he was my DT1, but just haven't. I mean, they will get there. You're right. Just not yet. Not this week.
It's defensive linemen with unfavorable matchups. I've gone with Joey Bosa. He's coming off an injury. Might be eased back in again. We saw this happen a few weeks back, and he's playing against a Cowboys offensive line that, as I said earlier, and has become quite healthy quite quickly. Mm-hmm. Jermaine Johnson, I think he'll have his hands full against that Eagles offensive line. Josh Allen, he'll have to be at his best. I'm a fan of Josh Allen, but I think he'll have to be at his best to get the better of Bernard Raymond, who returned to full practice following a concussion. Raymond, by the way, has really stepped his game up in year 2 and looks like a really capable pass blocker. So that's a situation to avoid, or at least start to fade. Maybe if you've got another player of a similar talent level with an easier matchup. Shaquil Barrett hasn't really set it on fire this year. He'll see plenty of the Detroit Lions, who have a pair of very good offensive tackles in Sewell and Taylor Decker as well. So that's a situation I want to avoid. And then Javon Hargrove, massive fan of his, but he faces a sneaky good sort of Cleveland Browns offensive line. That interior of that line is its strength, and if there's a week to avoid Hargrave, I think this might be it. That said, he is a sort of player who can just get it done, even though he's playing against tough opposition. So, but yeah, that's my 5. Again, not saying they're going to be poor. I'm just saying that compared to how they'll perform most weeks, this week might not be their best. So, DBs. On to DBs. Tell me who you've called on for week 6 at the DB spot. And, this is the most difficult of the positions because of that weekly volatility. But there's some stuff there that we can look to when we're thinking about guys we like and guys we don't. So, yeah, who do you like?
Who I like is Kader Kohou. It's hard for me to, put a corner into the conversation with DBs, but he's my highest ranked corner on the week. He is in a matchup against Carolina, who has just on the season, they've allowed tackle volume to they allowed 11 tackles to the slot corner last week, 6+ tackles in 3 of 5 games to the slot corner. The other 2 are slot corners that I don't trust could even make 6 tackles. So when you're faced with a solid actual tackling corner, Kader Kohou is ideal, and I don't see Carolina moving the ball anywhere past that. It's been an Adam Thielen show for the last 3 weeks, and I expect that to continue. So don't be shocked to see 10 or 11 tackles out of Kohou and potentially something more. I mean, if Miami, they like to blitz occasionally, and I think that could be an intriguing little spot for him to really fill the stat sheet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think other teams will look at what the Bills and Stephon Diggs specifically did to Kohou and then try to target him more? Because that could help as long as he retains his role. He could see an increase in pass breakups and tackle opportunities as well. If he's picked on a bit, do you think that's likely to happen?
I think the team, like with Diggs and that one, and specifically, he put him in a blender. Because it's 1-on-1 against Stephon Diggs from the 7-yard line. You're toast. There's nobody out there that's going to stop that. But at the same time, yes, I think that's a viable situation. And I think that from an IDP standpoint, that's not always a bad option either, is to have them pick on him even further, as long as he's productive and it's not to the point where he's a detriment to the team and they take snaps away, which I don't see happening whatsoever with them. But yeah, that's always concerned. I think we've seen that out of a couple different players and situations. It's, you need someone involved heavily enough in the run stopping. Like Kenny Moore was so valuable for Indy for those years. Still's valuable, just not as much. But yeah, I think that's a possibility. I think this specific week, I like him more than others, or at least more than other slot corners of weeks past.
I like it. I had him in a bunch of fantasy teams for a couple of weeks, and I forget why I moved on. I think someone dropped someone surprising, and I kind of went for the I saw something shiny and I just went for it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
So my DB riser this week is Antoine Winfield. He's actually my DB1 this week.
Nice.
One spot ahead of Javon Holland. That might change if Derwin becomes fully healthy, but I kind of like Winfield here. So he's always been one of those guys who will never quite keep up with the leading tacklers at the position. But he'll always more than make up for it in splash plays, in big plays. That said, I mean, even so, he's started this year like he'd been fired out of a cannon. In 4 games, he's got 29 combined tackles, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 3 pass breakups. That's just phenomenal. It's kind of put the defense on his back. That alone, though, wouldn't be enough to put him in my number 1 spot. But I really like his matchup this week. Jalen Hurts hasn't turned over the ball a ton, so the big plays may not be there. But the Eagles have allowed more tackles and a greater tackle efficiency to opposition safeties than any other team in the league. So, we might see a different kind of game out of Winfield this week, but I still think he's going to be very good. And at a position that, that my top 10 changes more quickly than any other position, really, at safety, at DB. I like Winfield this week. I'm right in the hot hand.
I was really going into the season, I had Winfield as my defense. I think my DB 9 or 10 overall, and then I let the talk of him primarily playing free safety instead of playing up in the box impact my opinion a little bit. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna move him down a little bit, which in turn made me avoid him in more drafts than I wanted to, and focus more on Ryan Neal. And at the end of the day, I really regret doing that, of course, in hindsight. But week in and week out, I look at the matchup, like you said, and I do have him higher up. I almost forgot about him because from the bye, I didn't take him out of my preset. I used my previous week's rankings to start my new ones. And it's bye week, Nate. You got to get ready for that. You got to be prepared.
I'm glad you did it too as well. I did it with Grant Delpit this week.
Yes, I almost did Delpit as well. I have so many at the bottom. I still have Delpit down there. I have to switch them. Man, see? And that's a great matchup. I love the matchup against San Francisco for all the reasons earlier why I said JOK and Anthony Walker are tricky matchups. I love him because I think Cleveland, they're going to have to keep Delpit up to at least help try to slow down any of the yak attack that San Francisco is going to have. But I can tell you who I'm down on a little bit more. And it's a week in and week out thing. I don't know why, and hopefully people listening that I have that are in leagues with me. I am on the trade Talanoa Hufanga bus entirely. If you had to guess what his tackle rate was for the season, and you probably know it because you follow and pay attention more than most, but 5%. 5%.
It's terrible. It's like it should be, even if it was double that, it would be, we wouldn't be too excited about it. But 5% is
atrocious. And he's got the 2 interceptions, one of which was a lucky interception at the end of the game that was worthless, and the other one was actually viable. But yeah, I'm just kind of an avoid, and I'm hoping there's still value for him on name and splash and hair alone, which I'll take. But yeah, I don't see it, man. How about you?
No, I'm also out on Hufanga. He's a player that came up on a pod earlier today, and I said at the time, and I'll say it to you as well, but I think his what we've seen from him to start this season is kind of reminiscent of what we saw from him during spells last year. He opened really fast. He kind of he impressed everybody with what he did in the first, I think it was 2 or 3 games of last year, especially the opener. But then he kind of settled into this situation where he wasn't really putting up great tackle productivity, and that was sustained. It was pretty poor for quite a while. I remember he was getting the odd interception though, and that's kind of where we are right now with him. His tackle production is really poor. He's having the odd interception, but I think there's far better, far more productive, far more reliable players to target at the DB position, and so he actually slid. I think now you mention it, more than any other DB in my list this week, unrelated to an injury. Yeah, he's down at like DB 45.
Hey, all right, that's where I got him.
Safety nice. 41. Yeah, well,
good.
I like it. But I previously had him. He was top. I think he was a low end DB1 for me to start the season. Maybe a DB2. Thereabouts. But I'm out on him. Good call. So my DB faller this week is Nick Scott.
Yes.
Safety 44, DB 50, one spot behind Donovan Wilson, who should rise once he gets healthy, and one ahead of Alontae Taylor. He played almost every snap in weeks 3 and 4, and then last week, 67% of the defensive snaps started to cede snaps to Jordan Battle, who had a season high 39%. As I said to John Macri, we kind of saw a similar thing happen in week 2, only for Scott to then play almost every down the following week and for Battle to kind of disappear. So I'm not convinced that Scott's completely disappearing, but the fact that it's happened 2 times in 4 weeks doesn't exactly fill me with confidence that his job is secure. Let's talk about in fact, we didn't talk about the DBs with favorable matchups as well. So I'm just going to run through both lists, the favorables and the guys that don't have a favorable list. And then, let me know how you feel about these and if you've got any guys to add. So first up, guys who are like this week at the DB position, Jordan Fuller, he's coming off his best game of the season, and he's got the Cardinals this week. The Cards have allowed one of the highest sort of tackle efficiencies against other safeties this year, and Josh Dobbs wasn't quite as careful with the ball last week as we've seen him in earlier games. Von Bell, Jaron Kearse, Amani Hooker, and Kevon Wallace. They're all got. Maybe Kenny Moore as well. I quite like the matchup each of those guys have got this week for different reasons. But those are some guys mainly for the tackle efficiency against the in terms of what their opposition tend to allow to their respective positions. Those are guys I like. The ones I don't like, both of the Broncos safeties, so Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson. Again, it's Mahomes, doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. And again, the Chiefs very few safeties have had big games against the Chiefs in terms of what I can recall. Cameron Curl and Percy Butler, who are playing the Falcons. Ridder's actually taken pretty good care of the ball, I think, throwing, I think it's 4 interceptions. And again, very few safeties have had big games. And then finally, Justin Reed. Similar reasons to Curl and Butler. Russ Wilson's only thrown 2 picks. And again, safeties have struggled against the Broncos for the most part.
Yeah, Justin Reed's been tricky because his usage along that defense has been scattered. I mean, one week they have him up in the box, and then he's completely out, and Mike Edwards is up in the box blitzing, and I don't like that inconsistency. And like you said, with the Denver safeties, Mahomes spreads the ball around to 11 different receivers every game, and so you're not going to see a consistent thread of passes going to one specific area where you can accumulate double-digit tackles, or tackles for loss don't really exist on the Chiefs all that much either, because Isaiah Pacheco doesn't take losses on his runs, and they're designed to get forward ahead of the line of scrimmage on most of their plays. I like the options you have for sure. I'll add one is the return of Marcus May. Houston has allowed tackles of 9, 13, 13, and 4 for 1. So they're averaging 9+ tackles to the free safety position. And with him and Tyrann Mathieu kind of alternating back and forth, I think that he's in line for a potentially big game, especially against a team like Houston, who is designed just to throw. And we know CJ Stroud hasn't turned the ball over, contrary to what we're looking for. But I think that we're seeing the tackle volume funneling towards that safety position, at least from what Houston's done. So I like Marcus May. I'm not quite sure his first game back, since it wasn't necessarily health related that he missed. I think that he should be good to go, but still, first game in, really in a minute, getting reacclimated. So, I mean, he was averaging 6.5 tackles and a half. So what, he had 6.5 tackles a game. He had a sack and an interception over in those 2 games. So he was productive.
So look, I mean, Nate, that kind of brings us to the end. That does it for tonight's show. I've got to say, and I know it would be, but it's been pretty damn cool to have you on. Your credentials are up there with the best of them. As I said at the top of this show, you've proven really successful in that Fantasy Pros competition. So it's been great to get your insight here tonight. So, would you remind the audience where to find you and your work, and maybe talk a little bit about that Fantasy Pros ranking competition for those who maybe aren't so familiar with it?
Sure, absolutely. So, number one, any comments or questions or any information or help I can ever provide to anybody, my DMs are always open to anybody. That's over at Nate Marcum, NateMarcum, over on the old Twitter machine. You can find all my work over at Fantasy in Frames. That's at fantasyinframes.com. They have a list. It's not just IDP, it's redraft, dynasty, but we try to do a little bit of everything and bring it to the masses in an easy, digestible format, not too much over people's head, but at the same time, here's the fishing pole, learn to fish, but we'll come drink some beers with you too, And so all the work there. And then Shoot the Gap is this week. It's on Friday. I think we're going to move it to Friday evening going forward. It just makes sense for our schedule. If that's the case, tune in there. We'd love to have anybody jump in. We'd love to have you on if you want to stay up till 2 a.m. again or something like that and hang out. Jase, your family as far as I'm concerned, so you're always welcome. And
dude, I'd be more than happy to come on. I am very used to staying up until silly o'clock in season. As I said to you before, this is the joys of following a sport on a different continent. It's it's great.
Well, I can tell you that I don't believe I've talked to anybody that is awake at 3 o'clock in the morning that is as clear and concise and has it together as you do for this show right now. So congratulations on that. But I wait
till you see me tomorrow. It'll be a different story.
I bet so. You're off. You got to just relax and just gonna go hang out. So that sounds nice and easy. But in regards to the Fantasy Pros competition, I got asked to take part in that a couple years back. And what it is if you're essentially on a pre-draft rankings that you set up over at fantasypros.com, takes that into account. And then there's a separate week by week ranking. And the goal is to be better than everybody else. But realistically, the goal is to provide a resource for people to look at when they have those difficult decisions between the positions or between players they have on their team, and guide them without having to go on and ask 25 different start-sit questions about, should I start Blake Cashman or Divine Diablo or whatever the scenario may be, as ugly as it will be once bye week start up. We know they get there. And so it's just you try to get as close to their overall finish week to week. And it's challenging because you go against what, consensus should say. You shouldn't put, as we said, Micah Parsons at the 33rd best defensive lineman. But guess what? He's going to go against Trent Williams, and it's not going to be a great matchup. And you just have to assume that. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy the weeks where I finish high. I've been lucky to be number 1 overall twice out this year so far. And I hate when I'm like 20th, which I've done as well. So it's a very stressful Wednesday morning to wake up to.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I mean, like, congratulations on your success so far. Clearly very good at what you do. Our audience, if you aren't familiar with Nate and his work, then I would encourage you to go and follow and support his work too. Clearly one of the best out there. As always, I can be found on Twitter or X at Jase Abbey, and the full rankings I've discussed on this show are available to subscribers on the IDP show, the IDP show site at theidpshow.com. Those rankings will be updated at least twice a week on Thursdays and again on Sundays, so do check back for updates. In the meantime, thanks to anyone who tuned in or watched the show. It's appreciated more than you know. Thanks and bye.
This was the IDP After Show.